Now, we do have to tell you guys, the first 48 hours of our move to Saudi Arabia was easily the most challenging time in our professional careers and I think in our lives. What's up, expats and travelers alike? I'm Josh with Expats Everywhere.
And I'm Kalie. And today we're here to talk to you about how we moved from South Korea to Saudi Arabia. So if you didn't see that video about South Korea, check the description below. That's our second video as we explain what we're doing and how we moved abroad.
So in this video, we're going to talk about the process of how we made a decision to move to Saudi Arabia, what the process was like getting a visa and getting into the country, and then we're going to talk a little bit about life in Saudi Arabia.
While we were living in South Korea, we decided that it was time to do something different. We were there for a few years. We wanted to check out a different area. And Josh was really interested in checking out the Middle East. Now, why were you interested in that?
Well, I had a couple objectives. One is I knew that the Middle East had much better wages for expat teachers, and I thought that that would be a good opportunity for us to cancel out our debt and just be able to be making a bit more money than we were making in South Korea or Spain. Another huge reason for me wanting to move to the Middle East was there is a lot of bias towards the Middle East in Western media. And what I mean by that is Western media doesn't really like things in the Middle East. I mean, whether that's Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, whatever. I mean, maybe UAE to a lesser extent, but when I say West, I don't mean just the US. I mean US, UK, Canada. There does seem to be some sort of bias there. Not saying it's always right or wrong, and not saying that it's always negative, but there's a bias there. Some sort of like political game that's being played in the media. And I had this fear, like this irrational fear driven into me by the media. And I wanted to be broken of that. The third reason that I wanted to move to the Middle East is anywhere that we've lived, so whether that be in Europe by living in Spain or in East Asia by living in South Korea, it gave us a base to travel and see more in that region. So I knew that if we lived in the Middle East, we'd have a great base to travel other Middle Eastern countries.
It's probably one of the best, actually. It's so well connected and it's really central. So when he said, let's do the Middle East, I said, okay, that's fine, but anywhere besides Saudi Arabia.
No, why did you say that?
Well, at the time, it's opened up a lot more now, but at the time, about 6-ish years ago, it was still very closed off, and I think same thing that Josh was saying, like with the media, it seemed very restrictive, especially towards women, and I thought, I don't want to do that. Maybe someplace like Dubai, which is a little more open, I'm okay to, but I just did not want to do Saudi Arabia. So I said, okay, let's start looking into jobs, just not in Saudi Arabia, because there's a lot of jobs available there. So I was like, let's just not look at those. So Josh was like, okay, but where do we end up?
Well, so we ended up not looking at Saudi Arabia initially. We were looking at other jobs in the Middle East, and most of them were either in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or Qatar, or Oman. And there weren't a ton of jobs in Oman that we could get into just with our experience and qualifications. Dubai was going to be a great one. We had a friend that was connected with a school in Dubai, and we were basically set to work there. We had jobs. We were going through the process of getting into Dubai in terms of visa and all that, and then there were problems.
So we had these jobs, but there seemed to be some red flags that we didn't like. And a big one was getting help with visa and communication with that. So in the Middle East especially, they're pretty good. If you get a good job, they're good at helping you with all of these things. And this school did not seem to be very good. They didn't seem to know what to do. They didn't seem to be very helpful. So that was a huge red flag, because it's like we're going to this unknown region of the world and it doesn't seem like this school has their stuff together. So that was one of the biggest red flags for us.
Yeah, and we're quite organized people, so going into something like that, we felt like we were going to be setting ourselves up for failure.
Before we ended up signing any contracts, Josh and I talked about it, and we thought, this doesn't seem very good. Let's start job hunting again. Well, job hunting, we were late in the game at that point, so what jobs were available?
Saudi Arabia.
So I said, okay, let's do it.
I actually went on to Dave's ESL, and that's where I found the jobs that we ended up landing in. And it all happened very, very quickly. They needed people to work really quickly. We had to make a quick decision. We did have a couple rounds of interviews, and we got connected with an agency in the U.S. that pretty much handles all of the visa work. You just have to supply them with certain documents, but they tell you and walk you through the process. It's pretty extensive. You also have to do a health check. So you have to go to a physician, a licensed, well, I don't know if it's a licensed physician per se, but you do have to go to a physician and you have to get all sorts of things done. You got to do the stool sample, blood work, everything. Urine, yes. So you get that stuff sent off, and you'll fill out some paperwork kind of talking about your background and what your religion is, things like that. We've been told that it doesn't really matter what you put on it. Just be honest, and you'll be okay.
For the religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thankfully...
Well, for all of it, be honest.
Be honest, yeah. You definitely want to be honest. Thankfully, we found out that this company wasn't just having a hard time hiring or had some people leave in a weird time, but they needed more people. They found out that they had more students and needed a higher demand of teachers.
Yeah, it was growth.
Yeah, so that worked out really well for us. So it wasn't like we were getting into a job that seemed kind of shady because they needed someone really late in the game, which it was. And they were very organized with how they gave us stuff. They step by step. So even though it was a lot and it seemed overwhelming at first, like, whoa, we have to go and get all of these medical things done. And even the doctor was like, geez, why do they want this? And we were just like, who knows? So it was very specific, but it was very organized. So even though it was a long process and kind of weird, you're like, why do I need all this stuff? They made it easy for you. And all of this medical stuff was to get a certain type of visa called the Iqama. So there are different types of visas. This was a more long-term visa. There are schools that have you do visa runs instead. But because we did the Iqama, we didn't have to.
Which ended up being to our benefit because we had times where we were able to stay on the compound while our colleagues were having to do their business visa runs and actually leave Saudi Arabia. Some companies, it's on your dime to do this, and other companies they'll pay to help you get out of the country, I guess.
But they would have to do it quite often, and we thankfully lived close to Bahrain, so you just drive over the bridge to Bahrain. But just being forced to do that and not being able to choose, it was just like, okay, it's your time to go do that. We didn't have to deal with that, which was nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we do have to tell you guys, the first 48 hours of our move to Saudi Arabia was easily the most challenging time in our professional careers and I think in our lives.
Yeah, it was quite overwhelming.
We ended up leaving from the U.S. and we were flying from Orlando up to New York. The flight from Orlando to New York, everything was normal. Everything, I mean, you had a mix of people that were traveling from there up north. But then when we got to our gate to fly from New York to Doha, the demographic of people changed. And I mean, I had never seen so many people from the Middle East in my life. It was a culture shock. It was good, but it was strange. It drew me out of my comfort zone. Now it's
while in the U.S.
Yeah, we were in the U.S. Now it's completely normal, but at first I was like, whoa, like, are we still in the U.S. up in here?
So I wasn't sure what to wear because I didn't have an abaya. So I just changed into a long sleeve black shirt and a long black skirt. And apparently we found out later on that's sufficient just because you're traveling in. But I was kind of like, is this going to be okay?
Yeah. Anyways, super long flight. We end up flying into an airport that is kind of towards Bahrain. It's a town called Dammam, and Dammam does have an international airport. It's not as big as the airport that you'll find in Riyadh, for example. But we definitely noticed there was like this shift that happened in the air, this feel that it just changed. And maybe it was because we were so far out of our comfort zones. The signage that we saw was in Arabic and in English, so that was good. The pictures on, the airport signage was recognizable. but there was just this feel, right? Something changed.
Felt quite different. And then immigration was a nightmare because it was our first time getting in. We couldn't go through quickly, which we could later on once we had our actual visa. But since it was our first entry, it was just awful. It was so disorganized. There were so many people. The lines were ridiculous, and we were there for hours. And it was already at that point like close to midnight anyway. So it was like, we're kind of getting tired. We've been flying. Like, let's just do this. We're here. And it was so disorganized.
I think we had traveled at that point over 24 hours. Or it was getting to that 24-hour period. So we were becoming really exhausted, and it was just a struggle. I will say this. The immigration officer was nice. Maybe like a little bit slow in terms of like how quickly they were trying to do things. I mean, they just got paid to sit there. They weren't trying to hit a quota of like 100 people an hour. Like, so what did they care?
Yeah.
But anyways, we got through that.
Finally.
And we were going to meet our contact person for work. I'm so thankful that our work did have a contact person meet us there and give us transportation from Dammam to Al-Hassa. But they weren't actually there.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, definitely make sure that someone picks you up at the airport because it's confusing and there's a lot of people and you want to be picked up by your company. But when we got there, we kind of walk out not knowing who we're going to be seeing, right? We just know we're supposed to be picked up with our little, names on a sign. And
our names were on a sign, though. We walk out, and we do actually see our names on a sign. It just happened to be sitting on a pole, not being manned by anybody.
Yeah, it was taped to a pole. And there were a lot of people around, so we kind of walk up to this pole, and there's a guy standing there, and we point, like, that's us. And he was like, oh, that's not me. And he kind of pantomimes that our driver went to get, like, a tea or coffee or something.
Yeah.
So we just stood there, and for a second, we kind of like, what should we do? But then eventually he came running up. It didn't take very long. He came running up.
And by run, she means shuffle.
Shuffled up, yeah.
Nobody runs in...
Yeah.
Phobes and, yeah.
He shuffles up and just says, come on. So we went and got in a van with him and just started driving.
Yeah, we got in a dark, I won't say it was a run-down van, but, the interior was a bit dark and it was late at night. We couldn't see out very much. It was a scary ride. It was a scary ride with very dimly lit street lamps in a pretty empty highway at speeds that were insane, like people whizzing by us. I'm glad that our driver didn't drive too fast, but he did. And the van broke down multiple times. And we sat there while he tried to fix it. And we sat there when he called people. And after several hours of a drive that normally takes under 2 hours, like an hour and a half, 2 hours, we finally arrived at the compound.
It was exhausting.
We arrived at the compound around 2 a.m. and the guy gets out and he just like wafts his hand towards the apartment. And it's like one of those where it's like, this is your abode. Like, how awesome is this place? And it wasn't awesome.
Yeah, he helps us unload our bags, and then someone was supposed to be there to meet us, but I think because it was so late at that point, because I think at that point it was probably closer to 3 or 4, because of the drive and immigration taking forever, someone was supposed to be there, like the director, and he was not, so that was like, okay, what do we do? Because we were supposed to start work the next day, just because things got held up and they were ready to go, and we were supposed to start work, but we had zero information. What time do we get up? What do we wear? Anything like that we didn't know. And I like to know those things. So we get in exhausted. And thankfully they had sheets and bedding and stuff that was in like packages so you knew that it was clean and like ready to go. We didn't have any food though. But I had thankfully packed a roll of toilet paper and some towels. So something to keep in mind if you're not sure, make sure you pack those things just to get you going. So we had a little bit of soap and everything, and I showered. Josh crashed out.
Yeah, I basically told Kalie, like, I'm out. I'm tired. And we didn't know when we had to work in the morning. So I fell asleep. Years later, I found out what Kalie did. But we got a knock at the door around 5:30, 6 o'clock. The starts there in Saudi Arabia for work can be quite early, and we get this knock on the door, and we're basically told that there are two shifts. There's an early morning shift and then an early shift, and that we would be on the early shift. So we were on the second shift actually to be taken to work. So we could sleep a little longer. Someone was going to bring us some food. That was clutch. So we weren't going on an empty stomach, but the first day at work was exhausting, and I had it easy. Kalie was the one that had it tough.
We just got thrown right in there. So going back real quick, when years later, I told Josh that we got there and I felt gross, so I wanted to shower and kind of freshen up. And I sat at the kitchen table while he was passed out in the bed, and I just looked around thinking, what did we just do? This is so overwhelming, and I cried. And I had never done that anywhere else. It just seemed like a lot. I was tired. I didn't like not knowing what was happening for that day because we had to work, and I just cried. But eventually it all worked out. So we get to work, and unfortunately, the women's side, so in Saudi, men teach men, boys or men, and women teach women or girls. And on the women's side, we were very understaffed because the women were having a hard time getting their visas. So they were coming, but still having a hard time, kind of like we did. And I just got thrown right in. So I got to watch in the morning session, and then in the afternoon session, I was off and I was teaching on my own, which was tough because they gave me, being the newbie, they gave me the worst class. So the girls that don't even want to be there, because in Saudi at university, they actually get paid to go there. So it was just a chance for them to make money, get out and actually see their friends, didn't care anything about learning English. So that was fun.
Yeah. It was a really challenging time. I had it easier because I was able to shadow for the first day and a half, 2 days, and then I got turned loose on my own class after we found out how the structure of teaching was. Pretty much we all taught the same things at the same pace, although some teachers had classes that were better and majors that were a bit more switched on and were able to go more in depth in the material.
They were more motivated.
And more motivated. But we were all pretty much teaching the same thing. We were more or less teaching by the book. It ended up being the easiest jobs that we ever had. And there's more to the story, but we're going to stop there and kind of wrap up with saying thanks for hanging in with us.
We don't want to make this too long, but there's a lot of interest about Saudi Arabia, and we want to share and open up to you about our lives there. So we will be vlogging a little more about Saudi Arabia. And if you haven't seen our other videos about South Korea and Spain, because we were there before, make sure you check those out in the description below.
If you've made it this far in our videos, we really appreciate it, and we'd like you guys to do us a favor and hit the like button, because that's going to help us reach more people and help us with channel growth. So if you are to this point, please hit that like button. Listen guys, we're doing this so we can share our experience with you all. So if you have any questions about Saudi Arabia or the other places that we've lived, leave it in the comment section below. If there's a topic that you want us to talk about, leave it in the comment section below and we'll try to get to it. If it's something that we can talk about, then we're going to make a video for that, because we want to put out stuff that you're wanting to watch. And if you like this type of content, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can get updates on what's happening in the world of expats everywhere.
See you guys later.
Bye.